Part 90. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiaorong. Chapter 892. Today was supposed to be a big day for Prince Duan, but unexpectedly, such an incident occurred. The officials and dignitaries who came to Prince Duan's mansion to attend the banquet could not stay any longer, and they all apologized and left. In a blink of an eye, only Tang Hui and Tang Qi were left beside Prince Duan. Tang Qi showed an unbelievable look in his eyes and asked, "Did you see clearly, that was really a dragon whip just now?" Tang Hui said, "He dared not fake such a thing in public. Appoint your highness as the crown prince, and give Tang Ning a dragon whip." Tang Qi's face was gloomy. "What does your majesty mean by this?" "Checks and balances." Tang Hui pondered for a moment and said, "He wants Tang Ning and Prince Duan to check and balance each other, but I think Tang Ning's actions today are not what your majesty wants. Your majesty wants a minister who stabilizes the country, not a powerful minister who oppresses the monarch." Tang Qi said, "Brother, what do you mean? We don't have to do anything, your majesty will deal with him." Tang Hui looked deep and said, "I believe your majesty will make a choice soon." Tang Ning and his companions walked out of Prince Duan's mansion. Princess Anyang still stared at the dragon whip in his hand. She raised her head, blinked her eyes, looked at Tang Ning, and asked, "Is this true?" Tang Ning said, "The dragon whip was given to me by His Majesty yesterday, but it has not been announced yet." Princess Anyang finally digested this information, and then a trace of worry appeared on her face. She said, "Prince Duan will be the crown prince soon. You didn't give him face today. He will definitely fight you to the death. Even His Majesty will not protect you. One is a minister and the other is his heir. Who will he lean on? Why don't you understand?" Tang Ning didn't want to reveal too much information to Princess Anyang, so she simply kept silent and handed the dragon whip to Chenzhou, asking him to put it away again. A duo lowered her head and said guiltily, "It's all my fault. I've caused trouble to brother Tang." "It's no trouble." Tang Ning patted her head and said, "I just wanted to try this dragon whip to see if it's easy to use. Although it's a bit heavy, it feels good to use. Today is different from the past. The situation in the capital has changed drastically. You have to think about yourself and your family's future." Princess Anyang looked up at him, sighed, and said, You should take care of yourself." After Princess Anyang sighed, she returned to the princess mansion. The officials and dignitaries who left Prince Duan's mansion also returned to their respective mansions. A shocking news in the capital quickly spread in the capital after they returned to the mansion. Tang Ning, the right prime minister, held the dragon whip bestowed by His Majesty and beat Prince Duan, who had been canonized as the crown prince, in the Prince Duan's mansion in full view of the public. It is said that Prince Duan jumped off the bridge and became incontinent after being beaten by him, and Tang Ning stopped. After beating Prince Duan, he left Prince Duan's mansion. None of the many guards in Prince Duan's mansion dared to stop him. Prince Duan had already stepped into the East Palace, and he would become the real crown prince after the enthronement ceremony. Everyone thought that no matter what kind of grievances the right prime minister had with Prince Duan before, now that Prince Duan had crossed the Dragon Gate, the right prime minister should not provoke him again. Who would have thought that the right prime minister was not afraid of Prince Duan's identity as the crown prince, but was bolder than before, beating Prince Duan like a stray dog in front of so many people. This was not only a disrespect to the crown prince, but also a disrespect to His Majesty. Your Majesty gave him the dragon whip and the transcendent power that other ministers did not have, not to let him act recklessly. His actions today were exactly what His Majesty tabooed. What His Majesty needed was a minister who could correct the king's mistakes, not a powerful minister riding on the monarch's head. Now that His Majesty has only a few days left to live, it is conceivable that before he dies, he will definitely help the next emperor eliminate this hidden danger. Everyone has almost expected that Tang Yuxiang, who has created many legends in Chen State and is famous, seems to have reached the peak of his glory. The news from Prince Duan's mansion was transmitted much faster than Tang Ning imagined. He returned home for only half an hour, and Wei Jian appeared in Tang mansion. He looked at Tang Ning with a complicated expression and said, "Lord Tang, His Majesty asked you to enter the palace." The fourth elder handed a palm-sized porcelain bottle to Tang Ning and nodded slightly to him. Tang Ning looked at Wei Jian and asked, "Can I bring a few more people with me when I enter the palace this time?" Wei Jian showed a trace of difficulty on his face. Tang Ning smiled and said, "Only 3 people, these 3 are the guests I recruited, they all know some strange medical skills, I want them to take a look at His Majesty, maybe His Majesty's illness can still turn around." Wei Jian thought about it, nodded and said, "Let them wait outside the palace for a while, we will go in and inform His Majesty." Tang Ning bowed and said, "Sorry to bother Wei." Tang Ning brought the 4th and 8th elders and the old beggar with him when he entered the palace, and as for old Zheng, he asked him to stay at home. He did not act on impulse when he attacked Prince Duan, but did it on purpose. This was a test for Emperor Chen, but just in case, he still brought the old beggar and 2 elders with him. On the carriage leading to the palace, Wei Jian held an apple in his hand, but did not take a bite. He looked at Tang Ning, sighed softly, and said, "Lord Tang, you are really reckless this time." Tang Ning did not continue his topic, but asked, "The last few times I went to the palace, I smelled a kind of incense in your Majesty's palace. The smell was a bit strange, and I liked it very much. I wonder what kind of incense your Majesty used." Wei Jian didn't know why Tang Ning asked this question, but he still said, "Your Majesty always uses sandalwood." Tang Ning's eyes flickered, but she didn't speak again. Because he also brought 3 old beggars into the palace this time, the carriage stopped in front of the palace gate. After the guard at the palace gate checked them, several people walked into the palace on foot. It saves time to pass by Shangshu province. Several figures walked out from Shangshu province. Prime Minister Wang, Grand Scholar Zhang and Fang Hongfang stood side by side. Tang Ning's eyes met with theirs, and everything was unspoken. The Prime Minister and the others did not speak, and followed Tang Ning's figure, looking in the direction of the harem. Except for a few of them, no one in the capital knew that the outcome of Tang Ning's meeting with His Majesty would be enough to change the situation in the Chen Kingdom, and perhaps set off a bloody storm within the capital. At the entrance of Yangshan Temple, the 3 old beggars were waiting outside the palace. Wei Jian and Tang Ning walked in. Tang Ning bowed and said, "I see your Majesty." Emperor Chen didn't look at him, looked at Wei Jian and said, "You go out first." Wei Jian originally wanted to talk about those 3 people, but when Emperor Chen spoke, he had no choice but to bow and exit the hall. Emperor Chen looked at the eunuchs and maids in the palace and said, "You guys can go down too." Yes, several eunuchs and maids quickly withdrew. Tang Ning looked around the hall. She found that the Yang temple was still filled with smoke, and the smell in the air was exactly what the 4th elder said, when the calming incense and sandalwood were mixed. Chen Huang lay on the bed, turned his head to look at Tang Ning, and asked, "Don't you have anything to say to me?" Tang Ning said, "I was entrusted by your Majesty to teach King Duan a lesson today with a dragon whip. That's because King Duan, as the prince, robbed the daughters of the people, confused right and wrong, and did not practice morality. I can't imagine that the Chen kingdoms what would happen if the world fell into the hands of such a person. You know, I didn't give you the dragon whip to beat the prince," Emperor Chen said with a trace of regret in his eyes. "You are the pillar of the country. I wanted you to support each other and govern well in this country, it seems impossible now." Tang Ning did not speak, but Chen Huang sighed softly and said, "Ever since I learned about you and manner, I have treated you as my son. How I wish that Prince Duan and Prince Kong could be like you. If they could be half as good as you with my ability, even if I die now, I can still feel at ease." Tang Ning's eyes changed slightly. He did not doubt Chen Huang's words. As the emperor, he had indeed given him the limit of what an emperor could give to his ministers, as well as unimaginable trust. It's a pity that they didn't. The look of regret on Huang Chen's face became even stronger. He looked at Tang Ning and said, although I hope you stay, I also have to think about the royal family and the next emperor. He paused for a moment, with a complicated look on his face, and slowly said, take manner away. The farther you go, the better. Never come back to Chen country. Tang Ning knew that this was Chen Wang's decision. He couldn't tolerate a prime minister who was incompatible with the emperor, so he had to give up Tang Ning. However, his decision still surprised Tang Ning. He originally thought that Emperor Chen would ambush 300 swordsmen here, or remove his official position first, and then accuse him of being disrespectful. After all, this is Chen Wang's behavior. Maybe it was because the man was about to die, or maybe he felt guilty towards Zhao Man, or maybe he suddenly became kind-hearted. No matter what the reason was, Tang Ning felt relieved. After working with Chen Huang for so many years, Jun and Chen there was a tacit understanding of cooperation, but actually he didn't want to confront Chen Huang. Seeing that he was silent, Chen Huang closed his eyes and asked, what else do you want to say? Yes, Tang Ning looked at him and said, His Majesty's illness is actually not an illness. Your Majesty is poisoned. Chen Huang was lying on the bed, his closed eyes suddenly opened. At this moment, he forgot all about Tang Ning's beating of Prince Duan and the feud between the emperor and his ministers. He didn't even ask Tang Ning what kind of poison he had been poisoned and how he was poisoned. He looked at Tang Ning with piercing eyes, and his voice trembled with excitement. Can I still be saved? Tang Ning nodded and said, that's why I'm here today. At this moment, Tang Ning saw a light she had never seen before in Chen Wang's eyes. This light contains an extreme desire for life. After Chen Huang was stunned for a moment, his face showed an unprecedented brilliance. He struggled to support his body and laughed, quick, help me up. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 893. No normal person is willing to die if there is hope of living. Even though Chen Huang felt that he was terminally ill and almost resigned to his fate, when he heard the news that he could still be saved, he couldn't help but feel excited, and his whole body instantly became much more energetic. Obviously, whether the throne is passed to King Run or to King Duan, how can it be better to be the emperor yourself? If he could still be emperor, he would not consider this issue at all. Tang Ning looked at him and said, Your Majesty, I have recruited 2 strange people when I came back from Guizhou this time. Why don't you let them diagnose your Majesty first? How could Chen Huang give up the hope of survival? He said anxiously, Xian quickly. After a moment, the 4th elder withdrew his fingers from Chen Huang's wrist. Chen Huang looked nervous and asked, How is it? The 4th elder stood up and said, Your Majesty, this poison can be cured. Ha ha ha, the depression in Chen Huang's heart for many days was gone. He couldn't help but smile up to the sky. He smiled and laughed without taking a breath. He covered his mouth and coughed violently. Wei Jian hurriedly stepped forward, patted him on the back, and said hastily, Your Majesty, please slow down, please. The 4th elder changed his tone and said, However, His Majesty has been deeply poisoned and his internal organs have been damaged. Even if he is nursed back to health, his lifespan will be greatly reduced. Emperor Chen asked, How many years do I have left? Do I have it in 5 years? The 4th elder said, If you take good care of it, it will last 10 years. Please, old man. Chen Huang looked at her and said, If you can help me save 10 years of life, I will be very grateful. Tang Ning glanced at Chen Huang, wondering if he would have said what he just said if he knew that the thing that almost poisoned him was invented by the 4th elder. After saying these words, Chen Huang seemed to have exhausted all his strength, leaning on the bed weakly, and asked feebly, How did I get poisoned? Tang Ning pointed to the incense burners in the palace and said to Wei Jian, "Go and extinguish those incense burners." Chen Huang looked at Tang Ning, confused and asked, "Is there something wrong with the incense burner?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "The incense your majesty uses on daily basis has been mixed with a drug called ancient incense. This drug comes from his hu. When consumed in moderation, it can soothe the nerves and help you sleep. But if you use it day and night, if you smell it at night, this medicine will turn into a deadly poison." Emperor Chen lowered his face and asked, "How could there be such a strange poison in the palace? Summon the provincial official responsible for this matter and interrogate him strictly." Tang Ning looked at Emperor Chen and said, "Your Majesty, in my opinion, this matter should not be made public. Someone in the palace dares to plot against your Majesty. The motive must be huge. If you act rashly, I'm afraid it will scare off the enemy." Tang Ning did not directly tell Emperor Chen that this incident was done by concubine Tang Hui. Firstly, he had no direct evidence, and secondly, he could not explain why he knew about it. Fortunately, as long as he knew that the problem was with the incense, follow the clues, and you will soon be able to find out the mastermind behind the scenes. Chen Huang obviously figured out the reason behind this. His face became extremely gloomy, and his eyes were filled with murderous intent. This was the closest he came to death. The last time was when King Kong rebelled. Without Tang Ning's advance preparation, he would have died long ago. This time, if Tang Ning came back a month later, she might have to attend his funeral. His chest rose and fell a few times. He looked at Tang Ning and said, "I will leave it to you to investigate this matter. Wei Jian, you are here to help." Wei Jian bowed slightly and said, "I obey the order." After Chen Huang took the antidote, he fell into a drowsy sleep. Anchengxiang is a chronic poison, and the detoxification process is also very long. It will take at least half a year to completely remove the remaining poison from his body. Tang Ning and Wei Jian walked out of the palace. Wei Jian looked at him and asked, "Master Tang, where should we start investigating?" Tang Ning said, "Let's go to the Ministry of Internal Affairs first." The Ministry of Internal Affairs, also known as the Ministry of Internal Affairs, is an organization responsible for the daily living expenses of the royal family. The incense used by Emperor Chen to calm the gods was prepared by the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and then fetched from the Ministry of Internal Affairs by eunuchs or palace maids, and brought to the Yangtze Temple. Since we want to investigate, we naturally have to start from the source. Of course, Tang Ning knew the answer in advance. He knew that the problem was not with the Ministry of Internal Affairs, but was just a matter of going through a process to dispel Huang Chen's suspicion. The chamberlain, Tang Ning looked at the incense burner on the table, pinched the ashes, put it under her nose, smelled it, and said, "No problem." Since there is no problem at the source, someone must have tampered with the process of transporting the incense burner from the Ministry of Internal Affairs to the Temple of Yang. Tang Ning looked at the officials and servants of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and said, "Don't tell anyone what happened today. Just treat it as if nothing happened." Several officials immediately bowed and said, "Yes." Despite Tang Ning's advice, Wei Jian was still worried and placed several trusted eunuchs here to monitor every move of everyone in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. When they reached the chamberlain, Tang Ning glanced at him and asked, "Who is holding the stove and burning incense every day?" Wei Jian thought for a moment and said, "Palace maid Zizu." Zizu is a palace maid, and her duty is to take the incense burner that His Majesty uses every day from the Ministry of Internal Affairs and put it in His Majesty's palace to light it. She has been doing this boring but not onerous task day after day for several years. Therefore, she has long been familiar with the eunuchs in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Today, she came to the Ministry of Internal Affairs on time. She looked at a young eunuch in the palace and asked, "Brother Kui, is the incense burner ready?" The young eunuch forced a smile on his face and said, "Okay, take it away quickly, Don't let His Majesty wait anxiously. Zizu saw that his smile was a little stiff, and asked in confusion, Brother Kui, what happened? You don't look very good. The young eunuch looked up and saw an eunuch at the door looking at him. He hurriedly explained, It's okay, I just did something wrong and was scolded by Steward Wang. Zizu picked up the incense burner, smiled, and said, Standard Wang is also for your own good. Being scolded by Steward Wang is much better than doing something wrong in the future and being punished by His Majesty and the Queen. The young eunuch nodded and said, Go quickly, be careful not to be punished if you are late. Then I'm leaving. Zizu smiled at him, holding the incense burner, and walked towards the Yangshen temple. She left the Ministry of Internal Affairs and walked to a deserted place. She looked around and saw that no one was around. She took out a paper bag from her sleeve, poured the white powder in the paper bag into the incense burner, stirred it with her fingers for a few times, and carefully flattened it. Then she put away the paper bag, picked up the incense burner again, and walked towards the palace in front. She walked to the front of the palace, looked at the two eunuchs guarding the door, and said, Zizu is here to bring incense to His Majesty. As soon as she finished speaking, the palace was opened from the inside, and Wei Jian came out and said, His Majesty said that he was tired of smelling sandalwood. You take this incense burner down and tell the Ministry of Internal Affairs to replace it with a burner of agar wood tomorrow. Zizu was stunned when she heard this, then nodded and said, Yes. She returned the burner of sandalwood to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, told them what Wei Zhongguan said, and then walked out of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and returned to her residence. A quarter of an hour later, she sneaked out from the back door, looked around, and found that no one was paying attention, so she hurried towards a palace somewhere. Chawai Palace. In a room somewhere. Zizu lowered her head and told concubine Tang Hui exactly what Wei Zhongguan said. Concubine Tang Hui looked cold and said, Whether it is sandalwood or agar wood, just add that thing. How much of it is left? Zizu said, There are still 2 months of supply left. Add several times the amount and use it up within half a month. Concubine Tang Hui's face showed a trace of cruelty, and said, Ming'er is already the prince, and it is time for His Majesty to die. Are you looking forward to my death? As soon as concubine Tang Hui finished speaking, a voice suddenly came from outside the door. This voice contained various emotions, shock, confusion, grief, and fierce murderous intent. Bang! The door that concubine Tang Hui had closed tightly was violently opened from the outside. Outside the door, the eunuchs and maids of Chu Hui Palace knelt on the ground. Emperor Chen stood at the door, supported by 2 eunuchs, looking at concubine Tang Hui with extremely disappointed eyes. Zizu's face was pale and bloodless. She looked at Emperor Chen standing at the door and the guards behind him. Suddenly, she gritted her teeth and slammed into the pillar beside her. Bang! After a muffled sound, there was a dazzling blood stain on the pillar, and Zizu's body fell to the ground without a sound. Concubine Tang Hui stared at everything in front of her, looked at the complicated look Emperor Chen gave her, and then looked at Zizu's body on the ground. Her mind went blank and she collapsed to the ground. Warm reminder, if you find that clicking the next page will force you to jump to other websites, please use the chapter error or contact us at the bottom to let us know. We will handle it as soon as possible. Thank you for your understanding. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 894. Chapter 889 of the main text volume of Ruyi Little Man, Death. Third update: the 9 clans must be punished for the crime of regicide. The moment she saw Emperor Chen, when Zizu crashed to death in front of her, and when Emperor Chen looked at her with eyes full of sadness and disappointment, concubine Tang Hui realized that King Duan was finished, the Tang family was finished, and it's over. Emperor Chen didn't say another word. He just took a deep look at concubine Tang Hui, closed his eyes, and said, "Go back to Yang Yang Temple." He no longer had to ask concubine Tang Hui anything. In fact, after knowing that she was poisoned, he already had a guess in his mind. If he dies at this time, King Duan and concubine Tang Hui will be the ones who will benefit the most. One of them will become the emperor and the other will become the queen mother. As long as he is the biggest stumbling block, they can get everything they want. He asked Tang Ning to investigate because he just wanted to confirm his suspicion. However, even though he had already guessed, when he heard and saw with his own eyes that his beloved concubine wanted to let him die early, a sad feeling inevitably arose in his heart. Tang Ning was standing next to Emperor Chen. He could clearly see the panic and helpless expression on the face of concubine Tang Hui, who was once aloof and arrogant, when she collapsed to the ground. Only an hour had passed since Huang Chen asked him to thoroughly investigate the case. An hour ago, she was still the superior concubine Tang Hui. An hour later, she was about to face an ending with no second possibility. If a concubine in the harem commits regicide, she should be punished for her crime. According to blood relationship, Tang Ning should call her aunt. However, the relationship between him and the Tang family had been completely severed that winter more than 20 years ago, and on that rainy night 4 years ago. He glanced at concubine Tang Hui and left behind Huang Chen. The imperial guards had already rushed forward to control concubine Tang Hui. When someone picked up Zizhu's body, they were shocked and said, "She is still angry." A guard leader stepped forward and said with a solemn expression, "Take her down first and wait for His Majesty to deal with her." Before Tang Ning could walk far, she naturally heard the movement behind her. The palace maid is still alive, just as he expected. For a weak woman like her, it is not an easy thing to hit herself to death on a wooden pillar. In fact, this is indeed something only a master can do. Things to do. When she wakes up and explains everything that concubine Tang Hui did, the farce of concubine regicide will be over. Tang Ning didn't sympathize with Tang Huifei, but linking this incident from beginning to end made him feel alarmed. Whether it was Tang Huifei's conspiracy that was exposed in advance, or the letter he received, or through the palace maid named Zizhu, he easily found Tang Huifei's place without any effort. Everything went too smoothly. The success gave Tang Ning the feeling that there was a pair of invisible hands manipulating everything behind her back. This feeling of being a pawn in the opponent's hands made him very uncomfortable. But Tang Ning didn't know who the person behind the scenes was, and she wasn't even sure about the existence of the person behind the scenes. When Tang Ning followed Emperor Chen to Yang Temple, King Huai was already waiting outside the palace. Emperor Chen had just summoned King Huai to the palace. The matter of concubine Tang Hui and Prince Duan was not easy to deal with either the Dali Temple or the Ministry of Punishment. Even Tang Ning would not be able to interfere in royal matters. Father, when King Huai saw Emperor Chen, he hurriedly bowed and saluted. Emperor Chen ignored him and walked straight into the Yangshen Temple. Seeing this, King Huai looked at Tang Ning and asked in confusion, "Master Tang, what exactly happened?" Tang Ning took a deep look at King Huai and saw confusion and doubt in his eyes. He lowered his head and said, "Your Majesty's illness was caused by concubine Tang Hui secretly poisoning her." Just now in Chu Hui Palace, concubine Tang Hui admitted all this with her own mouth. King Huai stood there stunned, as if he was shocked by this incident and could not speak. Wei Jian walked out, looked at Tang Ning and King Huai, and said, "Your Highness, Lord Tang, your Majesty lets you in." Tang Ning and King Huai walked in, and Chen Huang stood in the hall with his back to them. His back was particularly lonely, and his originally tall spine was now bent. Tang Ning couldn't sympathize with Chen Huang's feelings. He only felt that Chen Huang was pitiful. His son wants to kill him, his wife wants to poison him, and regardless of the fact that he is the emperor, as a father and a husband, What could be more chilling than these? This was more than just chilling, this was a knife inserted into his chest, pulled out, and then inserted again. Ordinary people might have already questioned the meaning of life when encountering his situation. Emperor Chen was obviously not someone who would commit suicide. He stood with his back to Tang Ning and King Huai for a long time. When he turned around, his expression had returned to indifference, and he said in a voice without any emotion, "Concubine Tang Hui intends to kill the king. Give her the gift of regicide 3 feet of white silk, let her take her own life, Prince Duan removes the crown prince, and the rest of the participants will be punished as treason." He looked at Wang Huai and Tang Ning and said, "I'll leave this case to you two. No one involved in the case will be let go. I obey the decree. My son obeys the order." When Tang Ning and King Huai walked outside the palace, they heard violent coughing coming from the palace. After all, Chen Wang's body was still too weak, and he had experienced such a mental shock. What he needed was to rest, and he didn't seem to be willing to do so. After hearing the news about the case again, he handed over the case to Tang Ning and Wang Huai. "Poisoning your majesty, I really didn't expect it." Tang Ning sighed and said, "Concubine Tang Hui was so bold." King Huai had recovered from his shock and shook his head and said, "The most important thing now is to investigate this case thoroughly and give an explanation to my father." Tang Ning said, "This case is a royal family matter. I, an outsider, can't intervene, so I'll leave it all to your majesty." King Huai looked at him and asked, "This matter is inseparable from the Tang family. Doesn't Lord Tang want to take revenge personally?" Tang Ning smiled and said, "Concubine Tang Hui murdered the emperor and plotted treason, and the 9 clans were executed as crime. If it is according to the law, I will also be sentenced to death, so how can I intervene?" "Lord Tang is joking." King Huai looked at him and said, "Every wrong has its perpetrator, every debt has its creditor. The mistakes made by concubine Tang Hui and the Tang family should not involve others. What do you think, Lord Tang?" Tang Ning laughed twice and said, "I think that His Highness King Huai is right." Tang Ning did not intervene in this matter. First, his identity was sensitive and it was not suitable for him to participate. Second, Tang Jing and his wife should not know about this matter. He handed this matter over to King Huai to handle it, hoping to save his face while saving his own face. After all, concubine Tang Hui and the Tang family were the real murderers of concubine Yang's incident. Tang Ning did not believe that King Huai was completely unaware of this matter. Obviously, King Huai had reached an agreement with him on this matter. In order not to leak the news, the harem has been blocked. King Huai had to stay in the palace to interrogate the people related to this case. Tang Ning left the harem and walked towards the palace gate. When passing by the Shangsha province, Fan Zhe walked out of the Shangsha province and walked side by side with Tang Ning. Tang Huifei murdered the emperor and plotted treason. His Majesty has ordered her to be executed. Tomorrow at the latest, Prince Duan and the Tang family will be arrested. You don't have to worry about the prince. Tell the Prime Minister that all plans are cancelled." Tang Ning whispered and floated away, leaving Fan Zhe on the spot with a shocked look on his face. Even though he was tough, he was shocked by this sudden news for a long time. At the same time, in Chawai Palace, the eunuchs and maids in Chawai Palace knelt on the ground in a row, their faces pale, their bodies trembling, and some of the timid ones even cried out. If the higher UPS were determined to kill Huifei and plot treason, everyone in Chawai Palace would be beheaded. How could they not be afraid? King Huai looked at them and said, "You don't have to be afraid. Those in Chawai Palace who have nothing to do with Huifei's rebellion will not be implicated." After comforting these palace servants, King Huai looked at the imperial guard and asked, "Where is the maid who was bribed by Huifei and poisoned your majesty?" The imperial guard said, "She wanted to commit suicide just now. I tied her up and locked her in the side hall." King Huai said, "Take me there." A moment later, in a side hall somewhere in Chawai Palace, King Huai walked to the door and said, "This case involves a lot of things. When I interrogate her, no one is allowed to come in." The general also knew that this matter involved the secrets of the royal family, which not everyone could inquire about. He immediately stood up and said, "Yes, sir." King Huai walked into the hall and closed the door from the inside. In the corner of the hall, a thin figure curled up there. Her body was tied tightly with ropes, and a piece of rag was stuffed in her mouth to prevent her from biting her tongue to commit suicide. King Huai walked over slowly, squatted down, took out the rag from her mouth, and gently wiped the blood on her forehead with his sleeve. Zizu didn't dodge or evade, but looked at him with soft eyes. King Huai looked at the wound on her forehead, a trace of pity appeared in his eyes, and asked softly, "Does it hurt?" Zizu smiled and shook her head, "No." King Huai smiled slightly, just like the stubborn boy who lost his mother more than 10 years ago and had nowhere to go after being bullied by his brothers. He could only hide in the little palace maid who had just entered the palace to apply medicine. But at that time, he was often injured and was always taken care of by others. There was a burst of hurried footsteps outside the palace, and the firelight flashed outside the window. Zizu's body shrank back. King Huai held her hand, looked at her with a smile, and said softly, "I am here, don't be afraid." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 895. In Chawai Palace, the side hall door was closed, and dozens of guards were guarding the door, not allowing anyone to enter. What happened in the harem today was too shocking. Such a major event of regicide and treason involved concubine Tang Hui, Prince Duan, and His Majesty. What Prince Huai asked in the hall must be the most secretive things of the royal family. Apart from the royal family, others who heard these secrets would surely be killed. However, no one knew that in the side hall, two figures were sitting side by side. The murderer of His Majesty, the maid Zizu, was leaning her head on Prince Huai's shoulder. Just like more than 10 years ago. But their positions were reversed at that time. At that time, one of them was a little maid who had just entered the palace and had no one to rely on, and the other was a marginal prince who had lost his mother and was often bullied. Because of similar experiences, they formed a friendship that seemed incredible in the eyes of others. Zizu tilted her head to look at King Huai and said, "Your Highness, take good care of yourself in the future." King Huai smiled and said, "I still want Sister Zizu to take care of me. The servants in the palace are clumsy and can't do simple things well." Zizu smiled, but didn't say anything else. The smile on King Huai's face gradually disappeared, and his expression became serious. He said, "Promise me, don't do stupid things." Zizu smiled and said, "If I die, they will never find your Highness again." King Huai said, "If you die, I won't take revenge." Zizu's face changed suddenly, and she hurriedly said, "How can this be? This is what you have to do since you were a child." King Huai looked at her and asked, "If the premise of revenge is to pay the price of your death, what is the difference between me and him?" Zizu lowered her head and remained silent. King Huai patted her shoulder and said, "Be good, be obedient, I will rescue you soon." At the door of the side hall. Seeing King Huai coming out, the guard general immediately bowed and said, "Your Highness." King Huai glanced at him and said, "She is the most important witness in this case. Keep an eye on her and don't let her commit suicide. If anything happens to her, I will be inseparable from all of you." The leader trembled and immediately said, "Don't worry, Your Highness, I will definitely keep an eye on her." King Huai left Chawai Palace and came to Yangshen Palace. Seeing Wei Jian standing outside the palace, he asked, "Is my father awake?" Wei Jian said, "Your Highness, Your Majesty just woke up." King Huai said, "The maid Zizu has confessed everything. I will report to my father." Wei Jian shook his head and said, "Your Majesty said, please let Your Highness spare Prince Duan's life." The rest of the matters can be discussed and handled with Lord Tang. You don't need to report to your majesty. He sighed and said, Your Majesty doesn't want to hear any more news about this case. King Huai glanced at the closed door of Yangshen Palace and said, I know. Tang Mansion. Tang Ning has returned home. Seeing him return safely, Zhongyi and others finally feel relieved. Only Su Mei sees his expression is different, comes to the study, and asks, What happened? Tang Ning said, Tang Huifei has admitted to poisoning His Majesty. The palace has blocked the news. At the latest tomorrow, Prince Duan, the Tang family and other people involved in this matter will be caught in one fell swoop. Su Mei looked at him in surprise and asked, Isn't this good news? The fourth elder said that even in Gizhu, the tranquilizing incense is not common. She didn't allocate much at the beginning. Except for the 10 elders, no one else can have it. Tang Ning shook his head, murmured, In this case, how did the Tang family and concubine Tang Hui get it? Su Mei looked at him and asked, Do you suspect that it is my master who is behind the Tang family? Tang Ning said, It is possible that she did this, and she is the only one in the capital. Su Mei shook her head and said, I can be sure that my master has no connection with the Tang family and Prince Duan. Tang Ning's face was more suspicious, and he asked puzzledly, Who could it be? This case was handled by Prince Huai himself, and there should be no omissions in the details. At that time, Tang Ning only needs to check the case files to know the source of the tranquilizing incense. This incident happened suddenly. In order not to alert the enemy, Tang Ning and Prince Huai blocked the news from the harem. Prince Duan and the Tang family did not know that their conspiracy had been exposed. Prince Duan's life can be regarded as colorful and full of ups and downs. After experiencing several ups and downs, he finally waited for a decree to be appointed as the crown prince. However, tonight is also his last night of pride. Tomorrow morning, he will face the cruel reality that he does not want to face in his life. In the Prince Duan's mansion. Even though the Prince Duan was chased and beaten by the right Prime Minister Tang Ning today like a stray dog, and lost face in public, it is still a happy day for the Prince Duan's mansion and the Tang family. His Majesty has issued an edict to confer the title of Crown Prince. The conferment ceremony will be held in 3 days. After the ceremony, the Prince Duan will be able to step into the East Palace, enter the court, and become the real master of the state of Chen. By then, all his enemies will be buried by the power in his hands. In the Prince Duan's mansion, all the guests during the day have dispersed, but the 2 brothers Tang Qi and Tang Hui stayed. Tang Qi said, earlier, concubine Hui sent a message that because of Tang Ning's beating of the Prince Duan, His Majesty has made up his mind to expel him from the state of Chen and not set foot in the capital in this life. His Majesty's decision was not unexpected by them. One is the Prime Minister, and the other is the new monarch. If he gives up one of them, will His Majesty have a second choice? It was just that His Majesty did not keep him in the capital forever to prevent future troubles, but expelled him, which was somewhat beyond Tang Qi's expectations. With the current His Majesty's decisive and ruthless temperament, he was able to make such a decision, which showed that Tang Ning's position in his heart was indeed not comparable to those of them. Tang Hui looked strange and said, Your Majesty is still merciful. Prince Duan lay on the bed with a look of resentment on his face, saying, Father spared his life, but I want him dead. Tang Qi looked at him and said, Tang Ning is no longer your opponent now. When your highness sits firmly on the throne of the crown prince and he leaves the capital, you can do whatever you want. I can't wait that long. Prince Duan's face was full of murderous intent, and he said, I can't wait a moment, I want him dead now. The humiliation he suffered in Prince Duan's mansion today was like a knife, deeply engraved in his heart, and has become a knot that he can hardly overcome. The prince, the future emperor, was beaten to incontinence in public. This will be a stain that he will never be able to wash away. As long as Tang Ning is alive, the resentment in his heart will never subside. Tang Hui looked at him and said, "Your Highness, a little impatience will ruin a big plan. Why not wait a little longer?" I said, "I can't wait even a day." Prince Duan's eyes were full of bloodshot. He tightly grasped the quilt under him and said, "My father has given up on him. What else should I endure?" Seeing that Prince Duan had completely lost his mind, Tang Hui opened his mouth, but swallowed back the words of advice that he was about to say. Tang Chi's eyes flickered, and he said, "Your Highness's words are not without reason. His actions today are known to everyone in the capital. If your Highness lets him go, even if he sits on the throne of the prince and becomes the emperor, he will be looked down upon. It is better to use him to establish authority and deter others, so that they know the fate of those who insult your Highness." Tang Chi's words touched Prince Duan's heart. A trace of bloodthirstiness appeared on his face, and he gritted his teeth and said, "Uncle is right, call Su Wei in, tonight I will make that Tang pay with blood." Su Wei is the chief guard of Prince Duan's mansion, commanding 500 guards. 500 guards are the limit of the private army that a prince can have. Seeing Tang Hui looking worried, Tang Chi said, "Brother, His Majesty has already expressed his position. What are you worried about? Can His Majesty deprive you of your position as crown prince just because you killed Tang Ning?" "That's not the case." Tang Hui shook his head. "How could His Majesty punish a crown prince severely for an abandoned child?" He looked towards the direction of the palace and whispered, "But I don't know why, I always feel a little uneasy." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 896. After the princes come of age, they need to leave the capital for their fiefdoms. This is the custom of the royal family. But this custom is not absolute. If the emperor appoints a crown prince early, the other princes will have no reason to stay in the capital once they come of age. But if the crown prince is not appointed, the emperor will leave a few princes as the choice of the crown prince. The three princes Kang, Duan, and Hui belong to the latter case. As for the Prince Fu, because he is the younger brother of the current emperor, the relationship between the brothers is harmonious, and His Majesty deliberately keeps him in the capital so that he can get together often. According to the laws of the state of Chen, the prince can have his own army, but the number shall not exceed 500. This is to prevent the prince from being too powerful and thus treason. In the capital with 100,000 guards guarding inside and outside, 500 people can't make any waves. If they want to rebel, they will be wiped out by the Yulin guards before they attack the palace. Although 500 people cannot rebel, it is more than enough to raise any mansion in the capital. Just after midnight, countless armored figures emerged from Prince Duan's mansion, ignoring the curfew in the capital, and rushed to a mansion across the street. No one noticed that in the dark corner opposite the mansion, a figure crossed several courtyard walls at a faster speed than them and ran to a mansion across the street. The 500 guards of Prince Duan's mansion were stopped by a group of dozens of people before they walked out of the street. These dozens of people stood in 2 rows, each wearing golden armor and holding a long spear. They were the Golden Feather Guards responsible for patrolling the city. The young general of the Golden Feather Guard was also shocked to see so many people appearing on the streets of the capital after the curfew, but he still ordered everyone to stop them and said sternly, "Who are you?" Among the guards of Prince Duan's mansion, the leader looked at the young general opposite coldly and said coldly, "The prince's mansion is doing business, please get out of the way." The young general of the Golden Feather Guard had already seen that these people were guards of Prince Duan's mansion. Although the ceremony of enthroning the prince had not yet been held, the fact that Prince Duan was promoted to the prince was indisputable. If it was not necessary, they were unwilling to go against the people of the prince's mansion. But it was already midnight, and the guards of Prince Duan's mansion were all out, and they must not be going to do anything good. However, they were so numerous and powerful that it was impossible to stop them with just a few dozen people. The young general decisively led his men to retreat, and after the guards of Prince Duan's mansion left, he lit a bamboo tube in his hand. Bang! A dazzling fire shot straight into the night sky, exploded in the sky, and turned into scattered fireworks, which could be seen in every corner of the capital. The guards of Prince Duan's mansion naturally saw the firework and knew that it was the call signal of the Golden Feather Guard. The leader frowned and said, "Hurry up later." Although he expected that the Golden Feather Guard would not dare to attack the people in the prince's mansion, if they arrived, the task assigned to them by Prince Duan tonight would not be completed. The guards heard the words and walked faster. At the same time, in the Tang mansion, Tang Ning and Lao Zheng stood side by side, the old beggar yawned, and the eighth and fourth elders stood beside Lao Zheng, with very relaxed expressions on their faces. 100 Tang family guards stood in front of them, with a somewhat solemn expression. Tang Ning learned about the movement of Prince Duan's mansion as soon as possible. Whether it was Prince Duan's mansion or the Tang family, his people were around for 12 hours to monitor. 500 guards from Prince Duan's mansion left Prince Duan's mansion at midnight. It was clear what he wanted to do without thinking. The Tang family did not have 500 guards. If their guards exceeded 100, it would be an overkill, but these 100 people were picked out of 100, and each of them was worth 10. Tang Ning did not expect that Prince Duan would be so bold after becoming the crown prince. He attacked the prime minister's mansion at night, and he calculated what kind of choice Emperor Chen would make between the two. Unfortunately, he did not calculate that his plan with concubine Tang Hui had been exposed. Old Zheng looked at Tang Ning and asked, "How are you going to deal with it?" Tang Ning said, "Anyone who dares to step into this door will be killed without mercy." On the street outside the door, 500 guards from Prince Duan's mansion approached quietly. The lanterns in front of the Tang family were hung high, emitting a faint light. The order given by Prince Duan was to kill no one. The guard leader stood in front of the Tang mansion and waved his hand. Then several people lifted a huge wood and hit the gate of the Tang family fiercely. The door bolt broke with a sound, and they did not see the panicked servants of the Tang family. A wave of arrows rained down. The next moment, the dozen people in front were shot into hedgehogs and fell to the ground. At this time, the second wave of arrows rained down. They had no time to react at all. In an instant, more than 10 people fell to the ground. The guard leader named Su Wei was stunned for a moment, then he immediately reacted and shouted, "Shoot, shoot." But before he finished speaking, a burst of yellow smoke suddenly appeared under his feet. At the same time, he smelled a pungent smell in his nose, and the next moment, his head became dizzy. "This smoke is poisonous." Su Wei's face changed drastically. As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately tore off a piece of his sleeve and covered his mouth and nose. However, within this short period of time, nearly 100 people fell to the ground. Su Wei was a little anxious, but more terrified. He thought that it would be a simple matter for the guards of the palace to come out in full force and overthrow a mansion, but he never expected that they would lose 20% of their men before they even stepped into the gate of the Tang mansion. He knew that he could not waste any more time. If he waited until Jinya Wei arrived, tonight's mission would definitely fail. There was a stern look in his eyes and he said loudly, "Come in." The Duan Palace guard at the front showed a stern look on his face, and was about to rush into the Tang Palace when he suddenly felt a stinging pain in his neck, wrists, ankles, etc. When he lowered his head and looked down, he saw in the moonlight that the ground was densely covered with things like centipedes. A poisonous insect like a scorpion was startled at the moment, and then his vision went dark, and he fell to the ground without knowing what was going on. The guards of Prince Duan's mansion had never seen such a battle before. In just one face-to-face encounter, there was a rain of arrows, poisonous smoke, and poisonous insects. By calculation, half of the 500 people had been lost. But not only did they not even have the opponent's people. See, they didn't even step through the door. Su Wei didn't have time to be shocked. He knew that the Tang family's guards would not exceed 100 people. The remaining people still had a great advantage in numbers, but they had not seen their opponents yet, which made him feel violently disturbed. Su Wei gritted his teeth and was about to issue another order when the ground beneath his feet suddenly shook. Figures wearing golden armor poured out from the end of the street. In a blink of an eye, they occupied the entire street and surrounded them. Jin Yue, Su Wei's face completely darkened. A thin figure walked slowly from behind. One of his legs was lame and he walked very slowly, but Su Wei did not dare to underestimate him, because this person was General Zhou Jinyue and Wu Lihao Hanwei. Wu Lihao glanced at the guards of Prince Duan's mansion in front of him with indifferent eyes, and said solemnly, "Put down your weapons, anyone who tampers with them will die." Although there were many people in Jinyue, they were Prince Duan and subordinates of the prince. Everyone was not too afraid and looked at Su Wei. However, while they were hesitating, Wu Lihao had already raised his hand and quickly waved it down. "There is an assassin assassinating Prime Minister Tang. If you resist with weapons within one breath, kill him." A breath is a breath, which is how long it takes for him to wave his hand. "Call out." As he waved his arm down, there was another shower of arrows in the night sky. The guards of Prince Duan's mansion who had no time to put down their weapons were immediately shot and killed on the spot. Even those who disarmed immediately, many were affected. Su Wei was hit by an arrow in his shoulder. He looked at Wu Lihao with eyes split open and gritted his teeth and said, "Han Wei." "Kneel down." Wu Lihao's face darkened and he said sternly, "Assassinate the Prime Minister of the dynasty, who gives you the courage to do so?" Two Jinyu guards had already come forward and forced him to kneel down. Su Wei continued to struggle, but Wu Lihao glanced at him and said, "Break his legs." Click. Jin Yue ordered the ban, and Su Wei screamed, his legs bent at a strange angle, and he knelt in front of Wu Lihao. Tang Ning walked out of the house, looked at Wu Lihao, cupped her hands and said, "Thank you, Lord Marquis, for arriving in time." Seeing Tang Ning, Wu Lihao showed a smile on his face and asked, "Jin Yue is late. Is Mr. Tang okay?" "It's okay." Tang Ning waved her hand, looked at Su Wei who was kneeling on the ground with both legs broken, and shook her head. "Prince Duan really doesn't want to wait all day." Su Wei's forehead was covered with cold sweat, but he still looked at Tang Ning with fierce eyes. A smile appeared on his face and he said, "You can hide from the first grade of junior high school, but you can't hide from the 15th grade. His Highness will not let you go. Wash your neck, wait for death, ha ha ha." Tang Ning glanced at him, then looked away and said, "Go to Prince Duan's mansion." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 897. The Tang Mansion is located in a place where many noble families in the capital are located. With such a big commotion happening outside, the surrounding mansions naturally noticed something unusual. The guards of Prince Duan's mansion were captured by the Golden Feather Guards, and more than 1,000 people marched towards Prince Duan's mansion. From the cracks in the doors of the various mansions, pairs of terrified eyes appeared. Someone actually attacked Prime Minister Tang's mansion late at night. Although everyone couldn't tell who they were, who else could gather so many people in the capital except Prince Duan? Prime Minister Tang had just beaten Prince Duan with a dragon whip today, causing Prince Duan, who had become the crown prince, to lose face in public. There was no need to guess who was behind this. After becoming the crown prince, Prince Duan obviously acted more recklessly, and could do things like attacking the Prime Minister's mansion at night. In the past, even if he was a prince, he would never be able to bear the consequences of this matter. However, he is the prince after all, and he has the confidence to act recklessly. His Majesty has only a few days left to live. For the stability of the court and the continuation of the country, he will not give up the prince for a prime minister. Prince Duan must have figured this out, so he dared to be so lawless. Speaking of which, even the powerful Tang Xiang should now realize that Prince Duan can attack him recklessly, but he can't touch Prince Duan's hair. Even if he brings the golden feather guard to confront Prince Duan face to face, what can he do? In the middle of the night, countless people were awakened by the attack under the moonlight, and their minds drifted to Prince Duan's mansion. At this time, Prince Duan's mansion was still brightly lit. Although it was past midnight, for that big event, the guards of Prince Duan's mansion were all dispatched tonight. Before the result was not reported back, who could sleep? Prince Duan was injured in his buttocks and lay on the bed. His face was lunar, but there was a hint of excitement. The signal of the golden feather guards to summon had long disappeared in the air. The Tang brothers stood in the courtyard with different expressions. Tang Chi breathed a sigh of relief and said, 500 guards can slaughter the Tang mansion in half an hour. Even if the golden feather guards find out, they will not be able to arrive in time. Tang Huai's face still had a trace of worry. Tang Chi looked at him and asked, "Are you worried that His Majesty will punish Prince Duan for this matter?" He shook his head and said, "Do you think that with His Majesty's temperament, he will be angry with the prince because of a dead prime minister? As long as this matter is done neatly and simply, His Majesty will just turn a blind eye." Tang Huai said, "That being said, I still feel a little uneasy in my heart." Tang Chi looked at him and said dissatisfiedly, "What are you worried about?" "He is too calm." Tang Huai looked at him and asked, "Do you think he is a fool who can't tell the situation?" Tang Chi opened his mouth and was speechless for a while. Tang Ning is certainly not a fool. In 4 years, he went from an ordinary person to the position of Prime Minister. There is no one smarter and more capable than him in the capital, or even in the state of Chen. Such a person naturally cannot fail to understand the situation and cannot be unaware that Prince Duan is already the crown prince. If he continues to fight with Prince Duan, he will only die. But the fact is that after Prince Duan became the crown prince, Tang Ning became more and more unscrupulous, which is not in line with common sense. Tang Huai was silent for a moment and asked, "Does he have anything else to rely on?" Tang Chi said, "His reliance is nothing more than His Majesty. Now that even His Majesty no longer protects him, what else does he have to rely on?" Even though he felt that what Tang Chi said made sense, Tang Huai's uneasiness not only did not dissipate, but deepened a bit. At this moment, a burst of hurried footsteps suddenly came from outside Prince Duan's mansion. Before the servants left behind in Prince Duan's mansion could react, the gate of Prince Duan's mansion fell straight down with a bang. A group of Jinya guards wearing golden armor rushed in from outside and surrounded the palace inside and outside. Bang! Su Wei, whose legs were broken, was thrown to the ground like a dead dog. Tang Huai and Tang Chi hurried out and saw Wu Lihao and Tang Ning coming in from outside. Their bodies were shaken and their faces immediately turned pale. A young general stepped forward and said in a deep voice, "The guards of Prince Duan's palace are so bold that they dared to assassinate Tang Xiang. Prince Duan's palace must hand over the mastermind within a quarter of an hour, otherwise." "What else?" Prince Duan was supported by 2 servants and walked out of the hall. He looked at Tang Ning with an extremely fierce look and said in a sinister voice, "This prince is the mastermind behind the scenes. What do you think? Are you going to put me in jail?" The young general's face changed slightly when he heard this. The prince is the crown prince of a country. No one except His Majesty can convict him. The Ministry of Justice can't do it, the Dali Temple can't do it, and the Jinya guards can't do it either. Prince Duan had calculated that His Majesty was seriously ill and the Golden Feather Guards could not do anything to him, so he was so fearless. Just as Wu Lihao was about to speak, Tang Ning waved his hand and walked forward slowly. When Prince Duan saw him, his face subconsciously changed and he could not help but take a few steps back. His butt was still aching. Although he dared to order the guards of the palace to kill Tang Ning, when Tang Ning really stood in front of him, he could not help but feel a fear in his heart. But thinking that he was already the crown prince, one was the king and the other was the minister, he became a little bolder. He glared at Tang Ning and shouted, "This crown prince is going to kill you, what do you want to do?" The once weak Prince Duan suddenly became tough, and even Tang Ning was a little surprised. It seems that after becoming the crown prince, Prince Duan has become much bolder. Tang Ning folded his arms, looked at him, and asked, "There is so much lawlessness under the capital, aren't you afraid of being convicted by His Majesty?" Prince Duan looked at him, a trace of sarcasm appeared on his face, and asked, "Do you think you are still the same as you were back then, and do I still think I am the Prince Duan?" Looking at Prince Duan puffing out his chest and looking high-spirited, Tang Ning's eyes showed a trace of pity. Prince Duan was indeed very domineering tonight, and his domineering made him look at him differently, but this was also his last domineering moment. Prince Duan keenly caught the trace of pity in Tang Ning's eyes. His body shook, and the next moment a strong sense of humiliation surged in his heart. He was already the prince, and was about to become the real master of the state of Chen, controlling the lives of millions of people. Who else could pity him, and who else deserved to pity him? His chest rose and fell, and a fire was brewing in his heart. At this moment, Tang Ning raised his head, waved to him, and said, "See you tomorrow." When these words came out, not only Prince Duan, Tang Qi and Tang Hui, but even the people of the Golden Feather Guard were stunned. After being attacked by the guards of Prince Duan's mansion, he brought people to Prince Duan's mansion aggressively. Everyone thought he would have a fierce conflict with Prince Duan, but who would have thought that he just waved his hand calmly and prepared to leave here? Could it be that even a strong person like Tang Xiang finally realized that Prince Duan at this time was no longer his match? After Prince Duan's expression was stunned, he seemed to have thought of something, and a sarcastic smile soon appeared on his face. The prince is the king, and the prime minister is the minister. If the king wants the minister to die, the minister has to die, but the minister cannot kill the king, otherwise it would be treason. It seems that Tang Ning finally realized this. Naturally, Tang Ning didn't know what Prince Duan was thinking. He was actually just pitiful for Prince Duan. The ending could not be changed. How much hope he had now, how much despair he would have in a few moments. When he passed by the two brothers Tang Hui and Tang Qi, he paused and suddenly asked, "Who gave you the tranquilizing incense?" Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 898. Who gave you the Anchengxiang? Tang Ning's voice was very soft, but it sounded like thunder in the ears of brothers Tang Qi and Tang Hui. The two of them raised their heads almost at the same time, looking at Tang Ning with despair on their faces. This is their Tang family, Prince Duan and concubine Tang Hui's biggest secret, poisoning your majesty and plotting rebellion. If this matter is revealed, not only concubine Tang Hui will die, but their brothers will also die, and Prince Duan's dream of becoming emperor will also come to nothing. Tang Ning knew that he would not get any useful information from brothers Tang Hui and Tang Qi, and he just wanted to scare them. After asking casually, Tang Ning and Wu Lihao walked out of Prince Duan's mansion. Stepping out of Prince Duan's mansion, Tang Ning looked at Marquis Wu Lai and said, "Please, Lord Marquis, let someone guard Prince Duan's mansion and don't let anyone in or out." Wu Lihao nodded first, then glanced at him again and asked, "Master Tang, will there be no problem if you do this? Prince Duan is the prince." Tang Ning smiled and said, "It won't be tomorrow." Wu Lihao paused, looked at him deeply, and said, "Don't worry, Mr. Tang, I will personally lead 1,000 gold feather guards to guard here tonight, and I promise not to let a fly fly out." Tang Ning looked back at Prince Duan's mansion and said, "Please, Lord Marquis, I'll treat you to a drink some other time." When Tang Ning, Lao Zhang and others returned to the Tang mansion, in Prince Duan's mansion, Tang Qi and Tang Hui finally recovered from the extreme shock, their bodies trembled at the same time, and they collapsed weakly on the ground. In this short day, they saw the hope of the Tang families rise, but now they were overwhelmed by the overwhelming despair. They knew very well what kind of sin they had committed and what kind of outcome was waiting for them. Prince Duan was supported by two people and walked over and said, "Uncles, Tang Ning is no longer the Tang Ning she was back then. How could you be so frightened like this?" Tang Chi slumped to the ground, raised his head with difficulty, and said in a hoarse voice, He knows." King Duan frowned and asked, "What do you know?" For some reason, seeing the expressions of Tang Chi and Tang Hui, he suddenly felt an extremely bad premonition in his heart. Anchengxiang. After Tang Chi finished speaking, the two servants of the palace who were supporting Prince Duan suddenly felt a slip in their hands. Prince Duan, who was being supported by them, for some reason, suddenly collapsed to the ground like the Tang brothers. King Duan's already pale face suddenly lost all color. At this moment, he suddenly understood what Tang Ning's look meant when she left. Why does the look in his eyes contain pity? He was pitying himself, pitying that he had just had everything and was about to lose it. Impossible, this is impossible. A look of confusion appeared on his face, he shook his head repeatedly, and finally burst out laughing, "This is impossible, he is lying to you, he is lying to you." When Prince Duan was in the palace, shouting and looking like he was crazy, Tang Ning had already returned to the Tang palace. Just now, Wu Lihao left 100 Jinya guards to clean up the scene. When Tang Ning and others returned, there was no body on the ground, but the smell of blood in the air was still very strong. Tang Ning sighed. With so many people dying in front of the house tonight, he could no longer live in peace. It seemed that it was time to consider moving. When he returned to the room, Tang Yao was still asleep. She got up from the bed and asked, "What have you been doing for so long?" When the spies at the gate of Prince Duan's mansion came to report just now, they were already asleep, and Tang Ning didn't wake them up. Tang Yao still didn't know what happened outside. Told a few fleas, Tang Ning took off her coat, washed briefly, and got into bed. He thought of something and asked, "How is the construction of the other courtyard outside the city going?" "It has been built a long time ago." Tang Yao glanced at him and said, "Would you like to go take a look tomorrow?" Tang Ning said, "I don't think I have much time tomorrow. Please tell Xiru and the others that we will move to another courtyard soon. We can just leave a few servants to take care of the house in the city." Tang Ning had his reasons for every decision he made. Tang Yao didn't ask any more questions. She had been waiting for Tang Ning for a long time, and now she felt a little sleepy. She soon fell asleep holding his arm. For some people, tonight was a sleepless night. Tang Ning had a sweet wife in her arms and had no dreams all night. After getting up and washing up, Qing ran in and said that King Hui had been waiting in the side hall for a quarter of an hour. Tang Ning walked to the side hall, and King Hui put down the teacup and said, "The palace maid Zizu has already poisoned me last night. He was ordered by concubine Tang Hui to poison my father half a year ago." Tang Ning asked, "Where did they get their soothing incense?" King Hui said, "According to Zizu, the Tang family sent it from outside the palace. Although the case of poisoning Emperor Chen was big, there was no need to go to trial. When concubine Tang Hui confessed her crime, Emperor Chen was by her side. As a concubine, she couldn't get anything like Anchengxiang. She must be connected with the Tang family outside. Without concubine Tang Hui, the Tang family's wish to poison Emperor Chen was just wishful thinking." Tang Ning looked at King Hui again and said straight to the point, "What did your majesty say?" King Hui said, "My father doesn't want to hear anything related to this case, so he has left the case to you and me." It seemed that Chen Huang must be heartbroken this time. His son and wife wanted to kill him. Tang Ning suspected that even if the fourth elder could bring him back from the Hell Gate, he might not be able to get over the hurdle in his heart. Prince Hui glanced at Tang Ning and said, "The golden feathered guard surrounded Prince Duan's mansion. Was it Prime Minister Tang's idea? Tang Ning said, Prince Duan sent the guards of the palace to attack Tang's mansion last night. Prince Huai shook his head and said, I didn't expect him to be so lawless. Tang Ning asked again, how does your majesty plan to deal with Prince Duan and concubine Tang Hui? Although treason is a capital crime, it also depends on who is the one who is rebelling. Prince Kong rebelled, but was only demoted to a commoner and imprisoned in the palace. Tang Ning was a little curious about how Emperor Chen would deal with Prince Duan and concubine Hui this time. Prince Hui said, my father asked me to spare Prince Duan's life. As for concubine Tang Hui, after the case is investigated, I will give her a 3-foot white silk and let her end her life on her own. When Prince Kong rebelled, concubine Zhang did not participate. Emperor Chen just sent her to the cold palace. This time, Prince Duan rebelled, concubine Tang Hui was the mastermind. It was not surprising that Emperor Chen sentenced him to death. He stood up and said, let's go to Prince Duan's mansion. Prince Duan's mansion had been surrounded by the golden feather guards last night. Fortunately, it was not in the downtown area, and there were not many people on weekdays. Even the few passers-by, seeing so many guards, had already avoided far away. As for the high-ranking mansions around Prince Duan's mansion, the gates had not been opened since last night. Tang Ning and Prince Huai walked forward, and Marquis Wu Lai came up and saluted, meet His Royal Highness Prince Huai, meet Prime Minister Tang. My lord, you have worked hard. Tang Ning bowed to him, and the three of them walked into Prince Duan's mansion side by side. Prince Duan was sitting on a stone bench in the courtyard, his face pale. When he saw Tang Ning and others coming in, he stood up and said sternly, I am the prince, you can't arrest me, you can't arrest me. Tang Ning glanced at Prince Duan and the Tang brothers and said, take them all away. You can't arrest me, you can't arrest me. Prince Duan's body was shaking like a sieve, and he said in a trembling voice, I am your cousin, I am your cousin. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 899. I am the Crown Prince. You can't arrest me. You are a bunch of traitors, traitors. Tang Ning and Prince Huai handed the task of arresting people to Marquis Wu Lai and left Prince Duan's mansion. Prince Duan's wailing continued behind him, and the sound was extremely shrill. Prince Duan had collapsed. Anyone who was named the Crown Prince yesterday and became a prisoner today would not behave much better than him. Tang Ning breathed a sigh of relief. After today, the once prominent Tang family no longer existed. King Huai looked at him, bowed and said, congratulations, Prime Minister Tang, your revenge has been achieved. Tang Ning did not show any happy expression on his face. He looked at King Huai calmly and said, Tang Jing and his wife have nothing to do with this matter. Please let them go, Your Highness. King Huai thought for a while and said, although Tang Jing and his wife did not participate in the regicide, they are still members of the Tang family. I can spare their lives, but Tang Jing's official position cannot be saved. Tang Ning did not think about saving his official position. He nodded and said, it should be so. King Huai said, thank you, Prime Minister Tang, for your understanding. He finally looked back at Prince Duan's mansion and said, I'll leave it to your highness. King Huai nodded and said, so many things happened last night. Prime Minister Tang must not have slept well. Why don't you go back to the mansion to rest? I'll leave it to you. Tang Ning slowly left Prince Duan's mansion. Inside Prince Duan's mansion, Prince Duan was captured by 2 golden feather guards. He was so angry that he fainted. On the other hand, although the Tang brothers were pale and bloodless, they performed much better than him. Wu Lihao stepped forward and said, if I had known this, why did I do it in the first place? Tang Huai shook his head and said, the winners are the kings and the losers are the bandits. This is how things are in the world. Wu Lihao leaned close to Tang Huai's ear and said, I know you killed Chang'er. Tang Huai's body trembled violently and looked at him. Wu Lihao grinned and said, "But it doesn't matter, because I also killed your son." Every word of Wu Lihao was like a heavy hammer, hitting Tang Huai's heart hard. His face turned blue, pointing at Wu Lihao, hissing, You. Wu Lihao didn't look at him again, looking at a young general of the Golden Feather Guard beside him, and said, "Take them away." There are many high-ranking families in the capital, and they found that the Prince Duan's mansion was surrounded by the Golden Feather Guard early in the morning. After asking around, they finally learned that the Prince Duan's mansion had all its guards out last night and attacked the Prime Minister's mansion at night. Unfortunately, the attack was unsuccessful. Instead, they were stopped by the patrolling Jinyue. That's why Tang Xiang led the Jinyue to surround the Prince Duan's mansion. This news shocked everyone, but soon they realized that the Jinyue could not surround the Prince Duan's mansion for long. The Prince Duan's mansion is the Prince Duan's mansion today, and it will be the prince's mansion tomorrow. The prince is the crown prince. It is natural for the king to let the minister die. It is treasonous and reverses the moral order for the minister to let the king die. This time, Tang Xiang suffered a big loss. Not only that, when the Prince Duan completely takes power, his life will be even more difficult. However, the development of things once again exceeded everyone's expectations. Until the sky was bright, the Jinyue did not retreat. Instead, some people saw that including the Prince Duan, the two brothers Tang Huai and Tang Qi, and several famous counselors of the Prince Duan's mansion were taken away by the Jinyue and locked up in the Dali Temple. Of course, the Prince Duan had a special status, so he was directly escorted into the palace. Next, a piece of news that was enough to shake the capital and the state of Chen came out from the palace. The Tang family joined forces with concubine Tang Hui to murder the emperor and rebel. Prince Duan was deposed as the crown prince. His Majesty temporarily handed over the government to the two prime ministers. As for the case of concubine Tang Hui murdering the emperor, it was handled by King Hui. When hearing this news, both ordinary people and officials and dignitaries had different feelings. Fear, doubt, shock, and disbelief. Who is Prince Duan? He was made the crown prince by His Majesty just 1 day ago. 1 day later, it was revealed that concubine Tang Hui and the Tang family had murdered the emperor. This is totally unreasonable. Prince Duan is already the crown prince, and His Majesty has been seriously ill for a long time. He doesn't have many days to live. Can concubine Tang Hui and the Tang family not even wait for this little time? However, the details that came from the palace one after another dispelled their doubts and made everyone clear about the whole story. It turned out that concubine Tang Hui and the Tang family had been murdering the emperor for half a year. It was because of them that His Majesty's health was getting worse day by day in the past 6 months. If it weren't for the sudden deterioration of His Majesty's health, how could the throne have been passed to Prince Duan? The Tang family and concubine Tang Hui had a good plan, but unfortunately they didn't handle the beginning and the end well, exposing this treasonous thing, which led to such a fate. After this incident, Right Prime Minister Tang Ning has become a taboo in the capital. He used his personal experience to prove that no one who opposed him would have a good end, whether it was an official, a prime minister, a prince, or even a prince, they could not escape the curse of the jinx. People thought that his luck had reached its limit again and again, but Prime Minister Feng, Prince Kong, and Prince Duan used their personal experience to help them prove that the jinx had no limit, and those who dared to oppose him had to be prepared to die. Tang Ning, who was preparing to pack up and move, heard such rumors and felt helpless. He was blamed for the downfall of Prime Minister Feng, the rebellion of Prince Kong, and the regicide of Prince Duan. These foolish ancient people, who were obsessed with gods and ghosts all day long, really should be influenced by the socialist materialistic values. Atuo came over with a puzzled face and asked, "Brother Tang, what does the broom star mean? Why do they all say you are the broom star?" "She is from the Gu tribe." Although she speaks Chinese very well, she does not have a deep understanding of Han culture. Tang Ning explained, "The broomstick is a very powerful god. They are saying that I am powerful." When A Duo looked at Tang Ning with admiration, the old beggar glanced at him, picked at his feet, and spat out a mouthful of thick phlegm. Chawai Palace. Chawai Palace is the residence of concubine Tang Hui. She is the mother of Prince Duan and the most powerful concubine in the palace. During the time when His Majesty was seriously ill, the entire harem was firmly controlled by her. King Duan was established as the crown prince yesterday. If King Duan can successfully ascend the throne, concubine Tang Hui will become the queen mother. By then, her status will be more noble and she will become the real master of the harem. However, if Prince Duan will never become emperor, because just yesterday, it was revealed that concubine Tang Hui and Prince Duan conspired to poison His Majesty. Prince Duan was deposed. Concubine Tang Hui was given a 3-foot white silk ribbon for murdering His Majesty. Today is the time of execution. After last night, concubine Tang Hui was imprisoned in Chawai Palace. The eunuchs and maids outside the palace looked at the palace with complicated eyes. So what if you are loved and favored, what if you have power for a while, but after an hour, you will turn into a pink skeleton? Several figures came from a distance, and everyone saluted upon seeing this, His Royal Highness King Hui, General Manager Wei. Wei Jian looked at the palace door in front of him and said, "Open the door." Immediately, a guard came forward and opened the palace door. After Wei Jian and King Hui walked in, he immediately closed the palace door. In the palace, concubine Tang Hui was sitting on the couch. Although her face looked a little haggard, her posture was upright and her pretty face had not changed. She still looked extremely graceful and elegant. Wei Jian stepped forward, placed a tray filled with white cloth on the table, and said, "I, upon your Majesty's order, ask your Majesty to die." Concubine Tang Hui looked at Wei Jian. This was the first time she had looked at the slave with a straight eye. Ironically, the slave she had never looked at with a straight eye had now become her killer. Concubine Tang Hui looked away and sat there, motionless. Wei Jian sighed and said, "Madam, if I had known what would happen today, why would you have done it in the first place?" Concubine Tang Hui asked, "How did you find out? Was it Zizu who snitched?" Wei Jian shook his head and said, "My Majesty knew how to use strange poisons from his Hu, but she didn't know that Mr. Tang had strange people from his Hu. Her Majesty's poisoning was concealed from the imperial doctor, but not from her." Concubine Tang Hui showed a trace of regret on her face and said, "I only regret that I was not cruel enough. If I had used more poison earlier, I wouldn't be here today." Wei Jian said, "If the Tang family had not exterminated mother and son more than 20 years ago, they would not be here today." Concubine Tang Hui looked at him, with a trace of regret on her face, and nodded, "Yes, if I could turn back time, I would never do that." Before she died, she finally did not care about the face of the Tang family and concubine Hui, and sighed. If it hadn't happened more than 20 years ago, today's Marquis of Dingguo, Right Chancellor of the Tang Dynasty, General of the Imperial Guard, and your Majesty's most valued minister, should be the most outstanding nephew of the younger generation of the Tang family. With his help, why do they need to do these futile things? Wei Jian glanced at her, shook his head slightly and said, "It's a pity, there is no what if." "There is no if," Tang Huifei murmured for a long time, then looked up at him and said, "You all go down." Wei Jian asked 2 eunuchs to hang Bai Ling on the palace beam, and then led them out. Although concubine Hui is a sinner, she is also concubine Hui. When she hanged herself, those who were slaves needed to avoid her. He is not worried about what tricks Tang Huifei will use. His Majesty's decree is that if she obeys, she can still have some dignity left. If she resists, she will not even have the last dignity left. I believe Tang Huifei understands this truth better than anyone else. After Wei Jian and others left, only King Huai and concubine Tang Hui were left in the palace. Concubine Tang Hui stood up and walked to the stool under Bai Ling. Without looking at King Huai, she said calmly, "Even if King Kongduan is deposed, you will not be able to become the prince." King Huai nodded and said, "I know." Concubine Tang Hui looked at him, "You know?" King Huai said, "Because my father is afraid of me. He is afraid that I will know what happened when you killed your mother and concubine and your empress. He is afraid that I will avenge your mother and concubine and your empress. He is afraid that I will expose what happened back then." Tang Huifei's body was shaken. She took a few steps back, and said in horror, You know everything." King Huai looked at him and said, "I knew it when my concubine and empress died." Tang Huifei's body shuddered, and she suddenly felt a little shuddering. The shadow of a young man seemed to appear in front of her eyes. The young man often showed a timid expression on his face, but his eyes were exceptionally bright, as if he could see through everything, just like him. "Look at yourself like this now. Thanks to the Empress for taking care of me in the early years, and thank you for taking care of Zizu for so long. Zhao Rui sends Empress on her way today." King Huai looked at her, stretched out his hand and said, "I beg you. It's you, it's you." Looking at his indifferent eyes, Tang Huifei seemed to realize something. She backed away repeatedly, knocked over the stool, and said in shock, "So the purple pearl is yours? There is one more thing that I don't know yet." King Huai looked at her and said with a smile, "The Tang family's ancient incense was actually given to me." Tang Huifei's face was pale and her body couldn't help but tremble. Only at this moment did she understand that every step she and the Tang family took and everything they did was part of King Huai's plan. What they thought was the only hope for King Duan to win was something he deliberately created. It turns out that from beginning to end, it was all a trap set by him. Concubine Tang Hui looked at him and lost her voice, "Devil, you are the devil." Maybe so. King Huai stepped forward, righted the stool knocked down by concubine Tang Hui, patted the dust on it, and said, "Actually, for all these years, I have never thought about being an emperor and sitting in that position. Those who are above are the real devils. I just want justice for my mother and concubine. I have already sought justice for concubine Zhangxian, and now it is my turn." Concubine Zhangxian was thrown into the cold palace because of Prince Kang's rebellion, and she died of illness there 2 months ago. Concubine Tang Hui looked at him, as if she had realized something, and said in a trembling voice, "Then, that's you too." King Huai did not deny it and continued, "But there is no need to worry, my dear. Many times, death is also a kind of relief. For some people, living will be more uncomfortable than death." Ha, ha ha. Tang Huifei looked at him, and at a certain moment, she suddenly laughed, but this smile had a tragic taste no matter how you looked at it. She knew that there was no way she could escape today. The palace had fallen into the hands of King Huai. If he had the intention, it would not be difficult to kill the king and become emperor. She looked at King Huai and said sadly, "What happened back then is all this palace is the work of one person. I beg you, after you become the emperor, spare Ming'er's life." "I have no intention of killing him." King Huai shook his head and said, "I also have no intention of killing my father and becoming emperor like you." Concubine Tang Hui looked at him and asked, "You don't hate him?" "Hate? Why don't you hate?" King Huai clenched his fists and asked, "If it weren't for him, would you have succeeded back then?" He took a deep breath, then unclenched his fist and said, "Death is too cheap for him. I want him to live well and let him see all this with his own eyes." Concubine Tang Hui showed a self-deprecating smile on her face and said, "Retribution, retribution." King Huai looked at Bai Ling hanging on the beam and said, "It's getting late. It's time for the Empress to get on her way." A moment later, the palace door of Chawai Palace opened. King Huai walked out of it, and Wei Jian bowed to him, walked into the hall, and said loudly, "Send off to the Empress." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Wrong Xiao Wrong. Chapter 900. The aftermath of concubine Tang Hui's suicide was not known to Tang Ning until the next day. Although she was the culprit of the regicide, she was still a concubine after all, and Emperor Chen finally left her body intact. Concubine Zhang Xian and concubine Tang Hui, who died of illness, were both guilty and could not be buried in the imperial mausoleum. However, Emperor Chen, who was recuperating and not concerned about court affairs, issued an order to rebuild a mausoleum for her. Although concubine Tang Hui died, the aftermath of the regicide was not over. The Tang family colluded with the palace concubines and intended to rebel. Tang Hui and Tang Qi, as the masterminds, were also sentenced to immediate execution. As for Tang Qi's son Tang Zhao, he escaped this disaster because he was not in the capital. However, the court had already sent people out of the capital to arrest him, and he could not escape the knife on his head after all. The only ones who survived the case were Tang Jing and his wife. Tang Jing had not been involved in the Tang family affairs for a long time and had nothing to do with the case. He was only stripped of his official position and his life was not in danger. In the Shaanxi province, an official walked up to Wang Xiang and shook his head and said, "Wang Xiang, the Tang family committed regicide and treason, which is a serious crime that will punish the 9 clans. Although Tang Jing did not participate, he should be executed according to the law." Wang Xiang glanced at him and said, "If you punish the 9 clans, then Tang Xiang and His Majesty are also in the 9 clans of the Tang family. Do you want to execute Tang Xiang and His Majesty as well?" "I dare not, I dare not." The official finally realized it and immediately bowed and retreated. He only thought about the Tang brothers, but forgot that His Majesty and Tang Xiang were also related to the Tang family. If Tang Xiang heard this, his career would be over. It would be fine if his career ended. If Tang Xiang classified him and the Duan Wang Tang family as the same party, he would die too unjustly. The Tang family committed such a heinous crime. From the perspective of the laws of the state of Chen, King Huai's handling method was somewhat merciful. At least, Tang Jing and his wife should not be able to escape death. However, if this case was really handled according to the law, and it was rigid and inflexible, wouldn't even Prime Minister Tang and His Majesty be involved? Therefore, even if King Huai was considered merciful, no one dared to object in the court. Of course, Tang Qi and Tang Huai, as the masterminds, were sentenced to death immediately. No one had any objection to such a treatment. In addition, several confidants of concubine Hui of Tang who were directly related to this case, except for the maid named Zizu who bit her tongue and committed suicide in the Dali temple, no one could escape the knife. Zizu was lucky. She committed suicide out of fear of crime, at least she could leave a complete body. Although others could live a few more days, they could not avoid the separation of their bodies. Even concubine Hui hanged herself, so naturally no one cared about the life and death of a little maid. However, for the Dali temple, this was a huge mistake. King Huai repeatedly told him that Zizu was the most important witness in the case and asked the Dali temple to guarantee Zizu's safety, but in the end, she died anyway. He had surrendered to Prince Duan a few months ago. This time, King Huai would not take this opportunity to remove him from the position of Dali temple minister. When he thought of this, the Dali temple minister was furious. He pointed at the Dali temple junior minister and said angrily, "You bastards, I told you to take good care of her, how did you do that?" The Dali temple junior minister was pale and said in a trembling voice, "My lord, it was my negligence." The Dali temple minister asked with a sullen face, "Where is the body of the palace maid?" The Dali temple junior minister said, "The weather has been hot these days. I was afraid that it would stink if I left it here, so I had someone drag it out and bury it last night." He wanted to see the body alive or dead, otherwise how could he explain to King Huai? The Dali temple minister was even more angry and shouted, "Where is it buried?" The Dali temple junior minister bowed his head and said, "Last night, it was dark and windy, and they didn't know which mass grave they buried it in. The person was gone, and even the body could not be found." The Dali temple minister's chest rose and fell a few times, and he gritted his teeth and said, "Get out of here." The Dali temple junior minister left the court in panic as if he had been pardoned. The moment he turned and walked out of the hall, the panic on his face disappeared, and a trace of subtle sarcasm emerged. The palace had been in turmoil for the past 2 days, and the capital was even more uneasy. A major event also happened in the Dali temple. The Dali temple minister was incompetent, and the important witness in the case of Prince Duan and concubine Hui's regicide died in the Dali temple. Prince Hui was furious and impeached the Dali temple minister to the Shangsha province. This kind of thing was very common, just like the last case of Jing Zhaoyan's dereliction of duty. For the Dali temple minister of the third rank, it was a trivial matter that could not be any smaller. But there are times for trivial matters. How can ordinary cases be compared with regicide cases? The Dali temple minister was directly dismissed and investigated because of this trivial matter. At the same time, many officials of the Dali temple were also implicated. The Shangsha province handled this matter very unreasonably. The Dali temple minister was one of the 9 ministers, and his official position was from the third rank, which was only half a head lower than the 6 ministers and half a level higher than the Jing Zhaoyan. However, the Jing Zhaoyan was only fined a few months of salary, while the Dali temple minister was even stripped of his official hat. In comparison, it seemed too unfair to the Dali temple minister. However, there was no voice of opposition in the court to this injustice. The Dali temple minister was a die-hard supporter of Prince Duan. Now that Prince Duan had killed the king, the Dali temple minister's head could still remain on his neck. It was already a great mercy of the court. What official position did he want? That is, Prince Hui was merciful. If he was as cruel as your majesty, I am afraid that all the officials and dignitaries who were close to Prince Duan before would have their heads cut off. Even so, they did not have a good end. All the officials and dignitaries who stood with Prince Duan in a high-profile manner during this period were dismissed, officials were dismissed, dignitaries were stripped of their titles, and this turmoil almost affected half of the court. However, even with this turmoil that overturned the court, the 2 prime ministers and the senior officials in the court remained silent. The court has always been like this. This is the price of standing on the wrong side, and it is also the path they chose themselves. If Prince Duan soared to the sky and ascended the throne, they would naturally be loyal ministers with unlimited prospects. Unfortunately, Prince Duan's rebellion failed, and they had to admit the price of their short-sightedness. Just as this hurricane in the capital swept the court, Tang Ning's family was already in a villa outside the capital. This villa is surrounded by mountains and rivers, with beautiful scenery around it, covering an area of more than several acres. In the villa, there are small bridges and flowing water, rockery and forests, and entertainment facilities are all available. In order to build this villa, Tang Yaoyao invested 100,000 taels of silver. This courtyard is dozens of miles away from the capital, and 2 miles away is the camp of Zhou Xiaoyi. If the incident that happened that night happened again, the guards of Prince Duan's mansion would be wiped out by Zhou Xiaoyi before they even approached. This is why Tang Ning built the courtyard here. With the natural barrier of Zhou Xiaoyi, no one can do anything to them unless the other guards gather together. And now the guards can't gather together even with the order of Emperor Chen. After moving out of the capital, Tang Ning has no worries. Tang Ning lay in the shade of the yard, enjoying the leg massage service of Qing'er and Qiu'er. After a while, another servant came to report that Prince Hui was visiting. After a while, in the living room of the Tang mansion, after King Hui sat down, he took a sip of tea and said, "Prince Tang really chose a good place, but it's too far from the capital, so it's not very convenient to find it." Tang Ning sighed and said, "It's a bit far, but at least no one came to the door in the middle of the night." Su Wei, the leader of the guards of Prince Duan's mansion, has been executed, and the rest of them have been exiled according to the law. King Huai was silent for a moment and said, "Prince Duan was imprisoned in the palace by his father, and like Prince Kong, he will never step out of the palace where he is imprisoned." Tang Ning thought for a while and asked, "Is the execution date tomorrow?" "Those people's day." Today. King Huai glanced at him and said, "Brothers Tang Huai and Tang Qi were executed an hour ago." Tang Ning was silent for a long time. King Huai handed him a memorial and said, "The case of concubine Hui has been closed. This is the memorial. Prime Minister Tang, please take a look." Tang Ning opened the memorial and after reading it, he suddenly asked, "Who gave the Anchengxiang to the Tang family? Have you found out?" King Huai looked at him, shook his head regretfully, and said, "No." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 901. After sitting for a while, King Huai stood up and said goodbye. Before leaving, he looked back at Tang Ning and asked, "How do you feel?" Tang Ning asked, "What do you feel?" King Huai asked, "The feeling of revenge." Tang Ning shook his head and said, "Not very good." King Huai glanced at him, nodded, and said, "Not very good." After that, he turned and left. Tang Ning looked at his back, with a strange light flashing in his eyes. Hiding his true power has always been his evaluation of King Huai. Whether it is his skills or scheming, Tang Ning has never seen anyone of his age who can beat him. Of course, he has to get rid of himself. King Huai is not stupid. On the contrary, he is one of the smartest people Tang Ning has ever seen. How could he watch King Kong or King Duan ascend the throne and push himself into a desperate situation? From beginning to end, although he has never argued with King Kong and King Duan, he is not surprised by anything. No matter how big the incident is, Tang Ning has never seen him panic. Either he is not afraid of death, or he knows that he will not die. Among the three princes, Kong Wang, Duan Wang, and Huai Wang, it is Kong Wang and Duan Wang who are fighting for the throne, but Huai Wang, who is hiding in the dark, is the most terrifying. Now that Kong Wang and Duan Wang have been eliminated, he is the only one left among the three princes who first appeared in front of everyone. If it weren't for Run Wang's interference, he would have been the only choice for the crown prince. It is undoubted that Huai Wang is not as simple as he looks, but Zhao Yuan is not a pushover. Even without Kong Wang and Duan Wang, Huai Wang would not be able to compete with him. If Zhao Yuan was not too young, or if Wang Xiang and others did not want to leave a bad reputation in history for forcing the emperor to abdicate, Run Wang would have sat on the position that Duan Wang had coveted for a long time. Not long after Huai Wang left, Xiao Tao came in with two people again. Tang Ning stood up and watched Tang Jing and his wife walk in from outside. As the only member of the Tang family who survived the disaster, Tang Ning knew that after Tang Huai and Tang Qi were beheaded, it was Tang Jing who helped them collect their bodies. Tang Jing looked at him, a trace of sadness flashed across his face, and he bowed his hands and said, "Thank you, Prime Minister Tang, for not killing me." The death of his brother and sister made him look much more haggard than before. He looked at Tang Ning with a complicated look, with sadness, regret, and relief, but no hatred. Tang Jing had nothing to do with what happened back then, and even secretly helped his parents a lot. They were Tang Shui's adoptive parents and had been taking care of his mother all these years. These were the reasons why Tang Ning saved them from King Huai. Tang Huai and Tang Qi deserved to die, but Tang Jing was different from them. Tang Ning did not deny it. He waved to Qing Er and said, "Qing Er, serve tea." No, Tang Jing waved his hand and said, "The carriage is waiting outside. We will leave soon." For the couple, the capital was indeed a sad place. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Going to Jiangnan?" She remembered that Tang Shui's adoptive mother was from the Jiangnan Su family. Tang Jing nodded and said, I wanted to see you again before I leave. I also have something to ask you. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, what is it? Although Shui is not our biological daughter, we have always treated her as our own. Tang Jing looked at him and said, I hope you can take good care of her in the future. Tang Ning would take good care of Tang Shui, but it was definitely not what Tang Jing meant. Tang Ning wanted to argue, opened his mouth, but in the end, he said nothing and just nodded. The only thing we are worried about is Shui, and now we can finally rest assured. Tang Jing breathed a sigh of relief and said, let's go. Tang Ning followed them out the door and saw a carriage waiting under the shade of the tree. Tang Jing helped the woman get on the carriage, and just as he was about to get on, a voice came from behind. Uncle. Tang Jing's body trembled and he looked back at Tang Ning. Tang Ning looked at him and smiled, take care. Tang Jing smiled and said, you too. The carriage went farther and farther, and finally disappeared on the boulevard, but Tang Ning still didn't take his eyes away. The great revenge was taken, and all the people in this world who had a life and death feud with him were dead, but in his heart, there was no pleasure of revenge. Tang Ning did not deny that he was a vengeful person, but he also admitted that the feeling of revenge was not always very satisfying. Su Ryu walked out from inside, stood beside him, looked up at him, took Tang Ning's hand, and held his fingers tightly. Brother Xiaoning. It's not your fault. Su Ryu looked up at him and said, they did something wrong and should be punished. Mother won't blame you. Tang Ning knew that he couldn't hide his thoughts from Su Ryu, so he hugged her gently and said, I know. Huaiwang Mansion, by the small lake in the mansion. A figure sat by the lake and had been sitting there for 3 hours. The fishing rod in his hand was shaking gently. 2 hours ago, a big fish was hooked. After struggling for 2 hours, the fish in the water was already exhausted and floated on the water. The figure by the lake was completely unaware and just sat by the lake in a daze. A trace of pity appeared on the face of Huai Wangfei. Just as she was about to step forward, she was stopped by a figure. The woman shook her head and said, let His Highness be alone. He was like this when he was a child. He had something on his mind, so he just sat there quietly and didn't like to be disturbed. The distress on Princess Huai's face became even stronger. After a long time, she looked up at her and said, Sister, can you tell me something about when he was a child? Of course the woman nodded, pointed to the pavilion by the lake, and said, let's go over there. After an unknown amount of time, King Huai finally took back the fishing rod, untied the copper fish hook from the big fish's mouth, and put the fish in the water. After entering the water, the fish, which had been motionless for an hour, suddenly shook its tail and swam into the deep water in an instant. A smile appeared on King Huai's lips, and a servant came up and whispered, Your Majesty has summoned me. Nourish the temple. The doors and windows in the hall are wide open, and it no longer looks like it was filled with smoke these days. Chen Huang leaned on the bed, his face still pale, but his complexion was much better than the previous few days. King Huai handed over a memorial and said, Concubine Hui hanged herself, the palace maid Zizu committed suicide, and the Tang brothers have been beheaded. The details of this case are all in this memorial. Please review it. Just handle this matter in accordance with the law. Chen Huang waved his hand and said, I won't read it. King Huai put away the memorial and said, Father, take a good rest. The court still needs father to be stable. Emperor Chen did not answer the question, but looked at King Huai and asked, When I was young, I was devoted to government affairs and neglected the management of the harem, which caused you, mother and son, to suffer a lot in the harem. Do you hate me? King Huai bowed and said, I don't dare. Chen Huang said, I know, I am sorry for you mother and son, and it is normal for you to hate me. King Huai knelt in the palace, raised his head and said, Father, I have learned from you. I have never hated my father. Okay, Okay. Emperor Chen looked at him and nodded slightly. After a moment, he looked at King Huai and said, "The rebellion of King Kong and King Duan broke my heart. Now you are the only one around me. If you are able to shoulder heavy responsibilities, I would like to make you the crown prince, in charge of the affairs of the country, and the general in charge of the affairs of the country. What do you think?" After he finished speaking, his eyes were fixed on King Huai's face. King Huai knelt on the ground, with no emotion on his face. He shook his head and said, "I am so virtuous and capable. I will never be able to bear this heavy burden. Chen Huangdao, in terms of ability, the 10 kings of Kong and Duan are not as good as you. If you are the emperor and join forces with Tang Ning and his ministers, you will definitely open up a new world for our Chen country. At that time, even if I die, I will be able to close your eyes." His breathing was a little rapid, as if he had already seen that day, but his eyes were still on King Huai's face. King Huai shook his head and said, "With my father and Prime Minister Tang here, Chen Guo will have such a day sooner or later." Emperor Chen looked at him and asked, "Don't you want to be the emperor?" King Huai raised his head and said with firm eyes, "I don't want to do it." Chen Huang looked into his eyes, hoping to see even a little desire for power in his eyes, but to his disappointment, he didn't see even a little bit. He sighed, shook his head and said, Your temperament is exactly the same as your uncle Fu Wang's." As his voice fell, the strange color in his eyes disappeared without a trace. King Huai stood up and said, "Father, take a good rest, and I will retire." Chen Huang, who closed his eyes to rest, did not see the sharp glint in King Huai's eyes when he turned around.